I'm working with the World Wide Web, so we're just beginning a project to measure and quantify internet freedom and internet openness. And what we mean is, how do human beings enjoy their rights online and use their rights? And then what is the context in which they use their rights? So what is the context in which the internet operates? So to be a little bit more specific, we are trying to compare states and the context in which the internet operates. That'll allow us to understand internet freedom and openness, compare state policies, figure out what is effective and what's not effective in terms of protecting human rights online. And somehow this is not working anymore. Okay. Well, that's my presentation, and I'm sticking to it. I was going to say one more thing, but it's all right.
Well, that's perfect, actually. Can I just, because you've been brilliantly, you've set the tone. That was 6 minutes. That's fantastic.
Okay. People understand me?
Which gives me the time to ask you a very quick question. Let's say we asked your research question, you know, what are the international norms of behaviour?
There aren't.
So you've answered your research question already then, which...
No, that's not my research question, that is a research question.
But let's say you, okay, so you don't, so what does that mean? So we ask that research question, we think about it, you find out that there aren't any norms, so what does that mean for your regulation?
Well, I think the internet is so new, even though one could say it started in 1969, that it takes time for societies to develop shared norms about it, right? It took till World War I till we developed international laws related to genocide, et cetera, right? It took the United States until 1934 till we learned how to regulate child labor. So it takes a long time for the public and states to interact to learn how to regulate in ways that encourage freedom, but also encourage responsibility.
But the process is one of regulation that is then amended and changed rather than no regulation until we understand it and then regulate, right?
That's absolutely true, but it should be based on a greater understanding. And I'd say only recently have we started to try to look at, gee, what works in terms of, for example, facilitating digital literacy, or what works in terms of protecting people's privacy? Does a ad hoc approach, self-regulatory approach work, as in the United States and in APEC? Or is there a better approach, a more top-down approach? Is the EU approach better, which is the top-down? We just don't know. Okay. So let's study it. I'm not saying don't regulate, but I'm saying we need greater understanding before we regulate.
Susan. Thank you. There's a really interesting example of it in the very beginning of the 20th century when we first introduced the motor car into the UK, and we were trying to figure out how what would be the speed limit that you would place on a motor car. And I think the first piece of legislation was drafted that it was in reference to a horse running at gallop. And that's how they tried to work out what would be a safe speed for a car.
So you may think Facebook is this nirvana. Here I am, I've worked in these two heavily regulated organizations, and I've finally joined an organization which bestrides the world, not caring about governments, ignoring regulators, doing the best it can to avoid regulation. That's not the organization I've joined. It certainly is not how we operate at Facebook. It is still a company whose success or failure depends on its leadership. And one of our leaders, Sheryl Sandberg, has been in London this week, as you may have seen, and it's her qualities as a leader that have a much greater impact on our success than how we are regulated. It's our innovation, our ability to innovate, our ability to keep ahead of the competition, and our responsiveness to our users that really makes the difference. But regulation matters. It bites on Facebook in a way that might surprise you. And it bites in two main ways. The one way is us as a company in our business model. So we are, yes, a social media company, but our business model is handling people's data, keeping that data secure and using it in innovative ways to help them have a fantastic experience, while also being able to control the way their data is used. And yes, the way we do that, the way we fund all this is by advertising. And we use that data as well to ensure that we can deliver as highly targeted as advertising as we possibly can in a relatively small amount of the screen that people are using Facebook on. In all of that, we are regulated. The way in which we handle people's data, the way we keep it secure, for users, for the kind of couple 100 million people who use Facebook in North America, we're regulated by the FTC. and there's now we're signed up to a 20-year program of audits by the FTC. For everybody else in the world, including everybody in this room, we are regulated in Ireland. Facebook Ireland is the bit of Facebook that you contract with, and we are regulated there by the Irish Data Protection Commission, who's done an extremely thorough audit of all of our data handling under Irish data protection law, with powers to force us to do things if we are not being compliant. As it is, he found us to be very compliant with European data protection law. So we're highly regulated in what our business is. The other way in which Facebook is regulated is users of Facebook. Hopefully that's all of you, but also a billion people around the world who are regularly using Facebook, and organizations. So all the companies that advertise on Facebook or use Facebook as part of their presence in the world, and public organizations, they're bound by regulation. Those regulations are typically regulations in their own country. And what we say to our users is, including all those clients, is you must abide by the laws of your country. We will not enforce those laws, but if we get a notice that says you are not complying with those laws, then we can and will take action against you. And we do that in respect of copyright infringement, in respect of people who are contravening advertising rules in their country. If people are trying to, for instance, advertise alcohol in certain countries, that's not allowed. And we provide tools to enable people to comply, but ultimately it's up to them to ensure they comply. And this absolutely includes speech. So we respect local speech laws, and that therefore means if you're a Facebook user in Germany, you will see, if you're in Germany and a Facebook user, you will not be able to see Holocaust denial material because that material is illegal in Germany, providing somebody's told us about it. So we don't filter for it, but if we get a notice that says, hey, this is contravening local law, we can block that content in that country. If you're then in the UK, German or otherwise, you can see that content because it's not illegal here. So we use technology to respect local speech laws. And we also work closely with law enforcement to ensure that where there is crime being committed on Facebook and they need to get access to data, that we have a proper process to enable them to do that. So regulation applies to social media in the context of Facebook. On the whole, our view is that the balance of regulation is working reasonably well. We worry about things like the Communications Data Bill, which attempt to use national law to impose it on services which are actually operating overseas. And that's a worry. But the pattern of regulation that we currently do are operating, we think it provides the right balance between protecting the user and enabling us as a company to thrive and to innovate.
In our instances, we disrupted markets, and 3 of those markets that we disrupted and therefore caused governments to be involved and have great involvement with what we do are freedom of speech, intellectual property, and data protection. And when you think about those 3 areas, when we owned Skype, we were up to our eyeballs in different types of speech issues that would happen around the globe. And I respect Simon's point, which is that you want to do your best to respect each of the local laws in which you deal with it. And from our perspective at eBay, it's a little easier in the commerce space to respect the local laws because you're engaged in commerce and there's a variety of things, and one of the teams I run is the prohibited items team. So if you can imagine, everywhere in the world there is some item that people don't want to allow for the resale or sale on our platforms, and we have to make the decisions every day. Do we ban that item? Do we allow that item? How do we work out what's the right regulatory regime for those items? And they are innumerable, and they get down to as small or as what people would consider to be as insignificant as charcoal briquettes. As an example, that in Hong Kong, we don't allow the resale of charcoal briquettes on our site because there has been an issue where people would commit suicide by lighting hibachis and closing their apartment. And so the Hong Kong government has said, please don't allow the resale of briquettes because that's used by people that aren't using it for barbecuing but are using it for that. And that's a minor issue, right? It's important for Hong Kong, but it's not an issue that has any importance anywhere else in the world. But the number of governments that come to us on a daily basis and say, please stop the sale of this, as somehow we are the internet, is innumerable. And it also is ones in which don't make a lot of sense. So we've worked here in the United Kingdom. There is a fascination with stopping the resale of knives because of the use of knives by people to harm other people. And what we think is that most kitchens in the United Kingdom have knives, and that pretty much at any street or in any high street, you can buy a knife from pretty much anywhere. But yet the myth of the internet is somehow that some kid will get a hold of it and misuse that knife other than just purchasing it at any of their corner stores. And so we respect that law, but we do question it. And so part of the difficulty in the freedom of speech space is, how do you reconcile competing interests, right? And we as private companies have to confront this all the time. So Simon mentioned with how do you deal with Nazi paraphernalia or hate speech. And because we're a private company, we can ban that. But there are many libertarians and others who want to use our platform and our open platforms to sell goods that in one part of the world are fine, but in another part of the world are not fine. And so for us, it's just about how do you keep up. And I will tell you, almost every company that I know of may state that they have principles with which they stand behind, but in the end, you have to muddle through. You have to live within the world we live in, and that world is one in which there's lots of gray areas, and you do your best to do that, because you can always find an example like, why do you censor what's shown to the Chinese internet purchaser, and that's somehow not okay, because we've made a value judgment in some parts of the world that that's not all right to censor the internet in China, but yet at the same point, we do censor our listings and our business for Germany to not display any type of hate speech or right wing. So then there are always examples globally of where whichever society you're in, you're going to say that is a line in which we do not want you to cross. And as a private company, we are going to be confronted with what is the right decision to make. And the best standard I've ever come up with is that you just hope to muddle through.